Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest, most fundamental choices any company has to make: how to actually pay for its own growth. And trust me, it's a high stakes decision that can shape the entire future of a business. So let's just start with a huge but simple question. Imagine a company has a game changing idea, maybe a new factory or a revolutionary product, but they need a ton of cash to make it happen. Where does that money come from? Well, the solution to this multi-million-dollar problem isn't just about finding the money. It's about designing a really smart financial plan. And that plan, that very specific mix of where the money comes from, is what we call its capital structure. Okay, so what tools does a company have to actually build this structure? Well, it can get pretty complicated. It really just boils down to two main options, two core ingredients in the financial toolkit. On one hand, you've got equity. This is basically owner's money. You get it by selling off little tiny pieces of the company, what we call shares, to investors. And on the other hand, you have debt. That's just borrowed money. The perfect way to think about it is like buying a house. Equity is your down payment, it's your skin in the game. Debt is the mortgage. You absolutely have to pay it back, with interest no matter what happens. A really key tool for raising debt is the bond. Honestly, you can just think of it as a formal, long-term IOU. The company gets cash from investors, and in return, it gives them this bond, which is really just a legal contract promising to pay all that money back plus interest over a set amount of time. Now, for companies with a fantastic reputation and really strong credit, they can issue a special kind of bond called a debenture. This is what's known as an unsecured loan. That means it isn't backed by physical stuff like buildings or machines. Nope, it's backed only by the company's good name and its promise to pay. That's a huge sign of trust. And then things get really interesting with this third option, a sort of hybrid, the preference share. It's part equity because it's a piece of ownership in the company, but it's also part debt because it pays a fixed, predictable dividend to its shareholders, kind of like an interest payment. For some investors, it's the best of both worlds. Okay, so we've got our tools, right? Equity, debt, and these cool hybrids. So how does a company actually decide on the right mix? It is definitely not a random choice. It is a very careful balancing act that's guided by some really important principles. And it really is a balancing act because a lot of these goals pull in completely opposite directions. For instance, using a lot of debt might boost profitability for the owners, but it puts your solvency at risk. Or you could sell a bunch of new shares to be safe, but that dilutes the original owner's control. It's a constant strategic trade-off. So you're probably wondering, is there a magic number? Well, not exactly, but there is a common guideline. A lot of experts think a company's in a good spot when its debt is somewhere in that 45% to 75% range. Any less than that, and you might be missing a chance to grow. But any more, and the risk of not being able to pay your bills gets a little too real. It's all about finding that sweet spot. All right, theory is great and all, but let's actually put this into practice. We're going to run the numbers on a real-world scenario to see exactly how this critical decision gets made, and more importantly, why it matters so much. So here's the setup. A company needs to raise 10 lakh rupees, or a million rupees, for a new project. They've got it narrowed down to two different financing plans. The big question is, which one is actually better for the owners? Now take a look at how different these two plans are. Option 1 is a pretty standard mix of common shares and new debt. But option 2, that one uses fewer shares and less debt and instead brings in those hybrid preference shares we were just talking about. Let's see what happens. So the ultimate test for this is something called earnings per share, or EPS. It tells us how much profit is generated for each single share. For option 1, the math's pretty straightforward. We calculate the interest, pay taxes, and then we divide whatever's left by the total number of shares. The final number, an EPS of 17.32 rupees. Okay, now for option 2, the process is almost identical, but with one crucial extra step. Remember, those preference shares have priority, so we have to pay their fixed dividends before we can figure out what's left for the common shareholders. After we run all the numbers, the EPS for option 2 comes out higher at 1950. And when we put them side by side, well, the chart really says it all. The conclusion is crystal clear. Even though both plans raise the exact same amount of cash, option 2 generates way more profit for each and every common shareholder. And this really proves it. The structure of the plan is everything. It's not just about getting the money, it's about the intelligence of the design. In this case, that clever mix in option 2 created a lot more value for the company's owners. So we've seen how the mechanics work. Now let's just zoom all the way out to the big picture and really understand why this one decision is so foundational to a company's entire future. You see, this whole exercise isn't just about some calculation on a spreadsheet. It's about building a financial foundation with one ultimate goal in mind: creating sustainable, long-term value for everyone who has a stake in the company. We're talking investors, lenders, and even the employees themselves. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that capital structure is the art of the trade-off. It's this constant, strategic choice between the risk that comes with debt and the reward of supercharging growth and getting higher returns for the owners. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. There's no single perfect answer that works for every company in every situation. Every leader has to weigh this choice for themselves. So if you were the CEO, how would you strike that balance? It's one of the biggest decisions you could ever make.